Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, 5 years ago, conservatives lost an icon with the passing of Rush Limbaugh. I'll walk through a little history of him and where he led the conservative movement. Plus, Stephen Colbert is in the news again ahead of his show cancellation coming up here in just a couple of months. We'll have all the details coming up. And a good Wednesday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live today on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget that you can take the show with you 24/7 on demand in your favorite podcast app by searching for the Nick Craig Show. You can also listen online by visiting the website nickcraig.com. Our show this morning is brought to you by the Law Group. Visit them online, lawgroupnc.com, or give them a call, 910-251-6088. We'll hear more from them coming up a little bit later on in the program this morning. 5 years ago yesterday, the legendary, the iconic Rush Limbaugh passed away. He had been at the helm of the EIB network for the better part of 30 years, providing those across the United States and in some cases across the world with common sense conservative thoughts. We'll get to a message released yesterday by President Donald Trump, going through his recollection and memory of meeting Rush for the first time. But what I wanted to really cover today was I'm not sure that conservatism is what it is in America today without Rush Limbaugh. Now, let me preface all of this by saying I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you exactly what would have happened. But using the information that is publicly available about the popularity, the success of Rush Limbaugh, it is hard for me to argue that I am sitting here today doing a program on a talk radio station without Rush Limbaugh. I might even argue that conservative talk radio does not exist in the form that it does today without Rush. Does it exist in some respects? Probably. Is it as prominent as it is today in many areas across the nation? Maybe not. And so there's a lot of different factors that led to the popularity and success of Rush Limbaugh, and really the complete and total revitalization of AM radio, which up until conservative talk and sports talk took over was dying. And of course, now we are seeing some 30 plus years later, the continued decline of AM radio. And so to kind of set the stage on all of this, you have to go back to the 60s and 70s, where you started to see the rise of FM radio, which of course many of you are familiar with and listen to on a daily basis. You had many music stations in markets that moved all of their programming off of AM and onto FM radio. And that left AM in this very weird position, this very weird spot where all of the music had shifted over to FM for good reason, because of the clarity, because of the quality. It was a much stronger, much better signal. And turns out music, which is high fidelity, sounds a lot better on FM radio than it does on AM radio. So it left AM in this very weird spot where the audience and the things that people wanted to listen to throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, which was music on the radio, it pushed them all over to the FM dial. And so starting in the late 80s, you had Rush begin his stint across the United States, started out in, I believe it was Sacramento, before moving to WABC radio in New York City. And that was the beginning of the revitalization of AM radio. And that is exactly what happened. Through the 1990s, in his syndication, Rush reached anywhere between 20 to 30 million listeners on his program. His show was broadcast on some 600 plus radio stations, many of them, I would argue most of them, being AM stations. And so not only was that successful and popular for Rush, but it provided the format. It provided the blueprint for others that followed him. Of course, you've got, national people, you've got your Mark Levins, your Sean Hannitys, those types, but also kind of built this format that we know now as conservative talk because of the unbelievable amount of success that he had with his program. It allowed these stations that were essentially vacated after major music had moved to FM. It provided the blueprint for these stations to be very profitable, for these stations to be able to generate significant amounts of revenue running conservative talk. And that is exactly what you saw through the 90s and early 2000s up until Rush's passing in 2021. February the 17th of 2021 is when he passed away. And I would argue that the format that many of you will enjoy and listen to day in and day out does not exist without him. It just, I don't think that it does. And with that, you kind of have to zoom out a little bit further and ask yourself the question, does something like Fox News exist without Rush? Reminder, Fox News didn't start until, I believe it was 1997, maybe 96. Rush Limbaugh had already been doing his nationally syndicated show for 8 years at that point, had already amassed an audience of 20 to 30 million listeners a week, giving the Murdoch family, Rupert Murdoch, who was the lead at Fox News, and Roger Ailes, those two combining to start the Fox News channel. Was there an audience without Rush providing and saying, hey guys, here's a massive audience of individuals. I've got 20 to 30 million people a week that listen to my voice between 12 noon and 3 p.m. Eastern each and every day. Does something like Fox News exist? Do we see the rise of all of the various websites that you read today? You look at websites like the Epic Times and Breitbart and townhall.com and some of these very prominent conservative thought leaders that still exist, fortunately, to today. Do any of those exist without Rush Limbaugh essentially laying out for anybody on the right, there is a massive audience here? Because if you go back before the time of Rush's rise to success and prominence, there was very few, if any, outlets for conservatives. Now, yes, you had conservatism before Rush Limbaugh. Of course, you had the Reagan era in the 80s. And so, yes, there were, in fact, conservatives before Rush Limbaugh. Let me not sit here and pretend that he was the first individual to invent the idea. That is not the case. But what he was very successful at doing was providing and laying out truly at the bottom floor what conservatism is, building that framework and providing news and information and analysis, and of course a bunch of funny commentary and funny bits and things like that drove a massive audience. And so you had a lot of what would be considered what you'd call, blue dog Democrats that voted for Ronald Reagan. Many blue dog Democrats here in North Carolina that supported somebody like Jesse Helms, who, were essentially converted and swayed to the ideals of being a tried and true conservative by somebody like Rush Limbaugh. And so without him in that period of time, as we went through the late 80s and through the 90s and into the early 2000s, I just don't know if conservative media exists in the format that it does today. I don't think that I am doing this program. I don't know that talk stations that exist all across the state of North Carolina, all across the country, exist the way that they do today without Rush laying out that blueprint, the framework for what was, for him, incredible amounts of wealth and success. I just don't know that exists in its current form. I really don't. I'm confident that something does. I don't think that conservatism falls by the wayside and just evaporates in front of our very eyes. I don't know if it's as prominent as it would have been had Rush, or as it is right now, had Rush not led that charge. As we, look back at 30 years of Rush Limbaugh behind the golden EIB microphone, one of the other questions that this kind of prompted and brought to my head was, do we see the rise of somebody like Donald Trump? Now, that is obviously very much towards the latter part of Rush's career. He began his rise to prominence, I believe, at 88, 89. And so many years before Donald Trump spawns onto the political scene in 2016. But is there the attitude to elect somebody like Trump in 2016 without Rush? And of course, all of the other ancillary industries that kind of rose up around him, other popular syndicated talk shows, as I mentioned, the Sean Hannitys, the Mark Levins, the Michael Savages. Do those individuals exist without Rush? Fox News Channel, all of the alternative conservative news channels that you hear about now, Newsmax and One American News, and all of these various platforms and places that you can get content. Of course, all of the websites as well. Does that stuff rise to that level of prominence? I really don't know what that answer is. So yesterday, which was the 17th of February, was the 5-year mark since Rush Limbaugh had passed away. President Donald Trump put out a post late night on Truth Social last night, saying that there will never be another Rush Limbaugh. These are the words directly out of the president's mouth.
Well, this is the 5th anniversary of the loss of a really great man, a great conservative, somebody that loved our country, loved his family, loved a lot of things, but he was a friend of mine, Rush Limbaugh. I'd never met Rush when I announced that I was running. I'll never forget, 2015, and I got a call all excited that Rush Limbaugh just endorsed you. I never met him. He liked my opening speech. He liked when I got up in June and I said, we got bad borders, we got bad crime, we got bad everything. And he liked it. I came down the escalator with now our First Lady, and he thought it was great. And he endorsed me, and then I got to know him, and I realized what a great guy he was. But it's 5 years that we miss Rush. As Sean Hannity would often say, there will never be another Rush Limbaugh. So to his family, his great wife and family, I just want to say we miss you all. We miss him, and there'll never be anybody like him. Thank you very much.
And that is absolutely a fact there from the president. There will never be anybody that likely rises to that level of prominence and provides the kind of information and analysis and insight that he did. But kind of going to the question I asked just a few minutes ago, does Donald Trump rise to prominence without Rush? And as you just heard the president's recollection of the story, very early on in the Trump run, Rush Limbaugh was a major supporter. And you've really got to put yourself back in, and it's hard to do, but you've got to go back to 2015 when Trump announces and into the early parts of 2016 and really remember what was going on in the Republican primary, what was going on in conservative circles. You had some major heavy hitters running for president. Now, some of them would go on to become laughing stocks of the GOP, but you had Jeb Bush, very prominent governor, very, of course, well-known name, both his brother and dad serving as president. You had Ted Cruz, who to this day remains a very prominent name. Marco Rubio, who is doing an incredible job in his position as the Secretary of State. You had the former head of HP and Carly Fiorina, Ben Carson. I mean, there were some major names in that 2016 primary. Donald Trump rose above all of it to the chagrin of many on the right early on that felt that Trump was not a serious candidate, that Trump was not a legitimate contender. You, of course, heard plenty of times he can't win. It would be impossible for him to win. There's no way he can do this, on and on and on again. Rush provided his audience at the time with some of the earlier endorsements of President Donald Trump. opened up the door to 20 plus million people and provided this kind of analysis. And Rush was on the Trump train very early on. He had sat through what had been miserable failure elections for the Republican Party in both 2008 and 2012, just absolute bloodbaths for the GOP at the hands of Mitt Romney and John McCain, who were atrocious presidential candidates and both got slaughtered by Obama. And so you had many individuals, I presume Rush included, that saw and had to sit through and work through the 8 years of Obama, watching the GOP miserably fail to coalesce behind a candidate that could win, and jumped on that train very early, I would argue, in comparison to a lot of other people that had their doubts very early on. And so I think it is kind of a fair assessment to say, had Rush not been doing what he was doing in 2014, 2015, 2016, I don't know if we see the rise in the prominence and even the success, the election victory that Donald Trump has in 2016. I just don't know that we see it. I don't know if all of the other voices are too loud in the room, and Donald Trump is not able to break through some of that noise. And then, of course, you have the infamous moment during the 2020 State of the Union address in which Donald Trump awards Rush Limbaugh with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, really kind of adding on to this concept, this working theory that many of the platforms, many of the websites, many of the podcasts or radio shows or Rumble channels, YouTube, it doesn't matter what platform you're talking about. If you are listening to somebody or watching somebody that is expressing a conservative viewpoint, expressing a conservative ideology, I don't know that they are able to do that. I don't know if there is a platform for them without Rush. And I can say that personally. I don't host mornings in Wilmington without Rush Limbaugh. I don't have this opportunity and this platform now between the podcast and the great radio audience on WBT in Charlotte. I don't know that I feel very confident saying I am not doing this without the success, the prominence, and really the trailblazing efforts that were laid out by Rush. And it's kind of a scary thing to think about how maybe conservatism does not really go into the mainstream like it did without him. Imagine a situation where there is no Fox News. And of course, I'm not saying that as, Fox is the end all be all, but there's no conservative voice on television. There's no conservative voice on radio. Very few, if any, conservative outlets existing. Think about what that would mean for national political discussions. Think about what that would mean for conservatives across, as Rush would say, the fruited plains of these United States. It's an interesting thought experiment. There will never be another Rush Limbaugh, and each and every day I'm grateful for the road that he paved and the path that he set up for individuals like myself and giving us this opportunity. So rest in peace to Rush Limbaugh, gone too soon, passing 5 years ago. All right, let's transition into something media related here, kind of tying some of this together. Stephen Colbert. You're very familiar, you're very aware of Stephen Colbert. He was a very successful host on Comedy Central with his Colbert Report, which was essentially a spin-off of Bill O'Reilly's Fox News program, where he kind of played a folk conservative on television. From a comedic standpoint, a very funny show. I remember watching it and very much enjoying it. And so back about a little over 10 years ago, he took over The Late Show on CBS. And from that period of time, it was blatantly obvious where Stephen Colbert was. He is a tried and true liberal. He is a rampant progressive, and he uses his platform, which is his prerogative to do, I'll note, to express his progressive ideology on his program every night. No different from Jimmy Kimmel or any of these other jokers and clowns that are on late night television. They are all rampant liberals. Now, again, that's their prerogative to do so, but we've started to see the consequence of that. Case in point, Stephen Colbert's show is ending here in just a couple of months. Why is it ending? Not because they're firing him, but because they're getting rid of The Late Show. They are completely wiping that off the table. They are no longer going to have, CBS will no longer have a late show later this year. Coming up here, I believe it's in the next 2 or 3 months is when that actually happens. That was when that program is slated to end. And you might be asking, why is that the case? Well, it's because nobody is watching. The last program apparently is going to be sometime in May of this year. So coming up in a couple of months, CBS announced back in July of 2025, so last year, that it would be ending The Late Show and retiring The Late Show altogether after 33 years. And so why is that happening? It's not because CBS is not getting into enough American households. They are. They're one of the most watched television networks in the United States. I am a strong believer that the show is being canceled and not replaced because there's no audience there anymore. The key demographic that is needed for a show like that, which is incredibly expensive to produce. Stephen Colbert's making something like $20 million a year from CBS. That does not include all of the more than 100 people that work on his show day in and day out. It is a very, very expensive venture for CBS. They are an entity in an industry that is struggling right now. I've documented it well. We've had a litany of conversations here on the program about that. Newspapers, television, radio. It's a struggling industry right now. And so you go back to the old adage, if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. That is, I think, what CBS has determined. And I don't think it's long before Jimmy Kimmel and Jimmy Fallon are in similar situations, depending on when their contracts are up, right? Because you can't be investing $100+ million a year into a program and not having a solid audience, which is exactly where these programs are. So in a last-ditch effort to stay relevant, again, he's gone in May. His show is canceled. He will no longer have this platform. I'm sure he'll do some sort of digital program to probably some pretty big success. He'll have probably a pretty big podcast audience. I don't know that he'll go to another major network. I don't know that he'll do stuff on CNN or MSNBC or anything like that. But if he wants it, he's a household name. He's been at it long enough. He's a well-known character. He will do whatever he wants to do, but it will not be on The Late Show with CBS. And so, again, trying to grasp onto any relevance possible ahead of his departure, there has been some brewing controversy for the CBS host and The Late Show after he claimed, Stephen Colbert claimed, that CBS News told him he could not air an interview with a Democrat Texas state representative known as James Telerio, who is running in Texas's U.S. Senate primary against Jasmine Crockett. So on Monday, Stephen Colbert himself claimed that CBS lawyers, quote, directly told him he could not air the interview. Colbert posted and said during his show, he, referring to the candidate, was supposed to be here, but we were told in no uncertain terms by our network's lawyers who called us directly that we could not have him on the broadcast. Then I was told in some uncertain terms that not only could I not have him on, I could not mention having him on, and because my network clearly does not want us to talk about this, let's talk about it. So being a bad boy, the network told me, my bosses told me not to do something, and I'm going to do it anyway. And so the controversy here, the issue here, apparently, according to Colbert, whether we're getting accurate information or not, has to do with the FCC's equal time rule. Now, this is something that I'm very familiar with. when I did mornings in Wilmington, covered a lot of local elections, as you can imagine, county commission, school board, general assembly candidates. I was always under the impression and did abide by rules that were set out by my management that if I invited a candidate on for a specific race, for example, let's say I had a Republican commissioner candidate on in New Hanover County, where the city of Wilmington is. If I invited a Republican candidate on, I was obligated to have the counter to that individual on if requested. Now, that doesn't mean that I had to go out and invite the Democrat candidate onto the program, of which I did not. But if they reached out and said, hey, you had Tim Smith on last week, he's running against me in this election, I would like to come on and talk. From the guidance that I received from the company that I worked for, I was obligated to have that individual on. Now, that is the way that I operated for the better part of 3 years. And there were plenty of times, actually, to the credit of some Democrats, where they would reach out and say, hey, I would like to be on your show. And I absolutely said, sure. I mean, I didn't necessarily want to have a conversation and interact with them, but that was the rule. That was the way that we operated as a radio station. And I did it plenty of times. Even one individual, a couple of local individuals who are still running now, reached out and were given that equal access, were given that equal airtime. And so for Stephen Colbert to be dismayed by the fact that lawyers at CBS said, hey, if you're going to have, one person who's running in the Senate Democratic primary on, you also need to, if they request, need to have somebody like Jasmine Crockett on. I would suspect, and I don't know this to be the case, but I would suspect that Crockett's team reached out to Colbert when they heard that her opposition was going to be on the CBS Late Show, which is available in every single American household practically across the country. I would suspect that her team reached out and probably heard crickets back from Colbert and his people. And so that is likely what led to this issue. Colbert explained on his show that the FCC's equal time rule was the given reason for the interview being yanked off the air. Instead, Colbert's team decided to run the interview on the show's YouTube channel, which in fact is not under the jurisdiction of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. However, CBS recently released a statement suggesting that the network would have allowed the interview on air had Colbert also had Crockett on the show for an equal amount of time and promotion. And so this is a situation where I would describe making a mountain out of a molehill, because there's really nothing here. I mean, for anybody that has been in broadcasting for any period of time, you are aware of this. And there are some questions over what the equal time rule is and how exactly it is implemented. But overall, in general, I learned very early on in broadcasting, if you are going to have a candidate on for political office and their opposition reaches out, you have an obligation under the requirements from the Federal Communication Commission to have those individuals on, whether you like it or not, whether you want them on or not. And for Stephen Colbert, who is allegedly a broadcast veteran, been doing this for 30 years, for him to be dismayed by this, for him to not understand this and to play the victim, just goes to show you how dishonest of a character Stephen Colbert really is. And that's where this situation lands. Stephen Colbert is a dishonest broker of truth. And as a typical leftist, as a typical liberal, is crying victim. Woe is me. Donald Trump didn't want me to run this interview. Brendan Carr, the commissioner of the FCC, didn't want me to run this interview. I mean, it's a load of crap. This has been the case for every broadcaster for decades. And so it's absurd to think that Stephen Colbert wants to claim that he's being treated differently. Now, some of you might be asking the question, well, what about other programs? What about Fox News? What about CNN? What about MSNBC? Well, ladies and gentlemen, those are cable networks. They are not under the jurisdiction of the FCC. it is a completely different ballgame. I'll have some more thoughts on that part of it coming up here in just a couple of minutes. Before that, I do want to tell you about the law group here in Wilmington and thank them for their continued support of the Nick Craig Show, and remind you that when legal challenges arise, trust the law group here in Wilmington. Since 2003, their experienced attorneys have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across Eastern North Carolina. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong defense. If so, the law group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. Great news, ladies and gentlemen. They're located in downtown Wilmington and just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. Give them a call, 910-251-6088, or visit their website, lawgroupnc.com. The Law Group, experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate the Law Group and their continued support of the Nick Craig Show. All right, we'll grab a quick break. More coming up after this. You're listening to the Nick Craig Show on streaming live this weekday morning, 7 a.m. on YouTube, at Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. Good Wednesday to you. Welcome back to the Nick Craig Show. Don't forget that if you are enjoying the program here, you can support it financially and get access to daily show notes and more by visiting patreon.com/Nick Craig. Access to those daily show notes, plus our monthly chat. We jump on a Zoom call for a couple of hours once a month to chat about all of the news and topics and conversations of the day. That'll be coming up here in just a couple of weeks. Head on over to patreon.com/Nick Craig. You can support the show for as little as $5 or $10 a month. Patreon.com/Nick Craig. We've got a great group over on Patreon. Appreciate their support. We're talking about Stephen Colbert. He is the victim over at The Late Show on CBS. His show is being canceled coming up in May because nobody is watching it. CBS is funneling hundreds of millions of dollars into the program every year. Nobody's watching it, meaning there's no advertising. It is a loss leader for CBS. So they, making a smart business decision, in my estimation, have decided to move past the show. The show is over in May. It's not that Stephen Colbert is being fired. It's that the show is ending. The Late Show, which has been on CBS for 30 some odd years, is ending. There's no longer a financial interest in CBS to continue to produce that show. So as I mentioned, Colbert is trying to grab any last bit of relevancy that he possibly can before he's axed coming up here in a couple of months. And so there's this controversy about him having on a Texas state representative by the name of James Tallarico, who is running for the U.S. Senate Democrat primary against Jasmine Crockett. Colbert wanted to have Tallarico on his show, and he was told by CBS, hey, you can do that, but just be aware, just be advised that could trigger the FCC's equal time rule, which will require you to interview those other candidates if they request. So Colbert goes on television and makes this heartfelt plea as to how he's being censored by the FCC and by CBS, and the Trump administration doesn't want you to see this interview, and he is the true victim in all of this. And so CBS clapped back. I mean, they blasted their own employee in a statement on Tuesday saying, quote, "The Late Show was not prohibited by CBS from broadcasting the interview with Representative James Tallarico. The show was provided legal guidance that its broadcast could trigger the FCC's equal time rule for two other candidates, including Representative Jasmine Crockett, and presented options for how the equal time for other candidates could be fulfilled," which, as I just mentioned in the previous segment, is what every broadcaster is fully aware of, is a very common, well-known, well-understood practice in broadcasting. CBS's statement goes on to say this: "The Late Show decided to present the interview through its YouTube channel with an on-air promotion on broadcast rather than potentially providing the equal time options." So it wasn't the higher-ups at CBS that forced Colbert to run this show on YouTube. It wasn't evil, awful, terrible Donald Trump that forced Stephen Colbert to run this interview on YouTube. It wasn't Brendan Carr, the commissioner of the Federal Communications Commission, that forced him to run it on YouTube. They decided to do so. And why? Because they obviously don't want to give equal airtime to Jasmine Crockett for whatever reason. Now, I think Jasmine Crockett is a fool. I mean, by definition, I don't think she's a very intelligent individual. If you listen to her speak for any significant period of time, it is blatantly obvious that if she wins that Senate primary in Texas, that she will get annihilated in the general election. And I'm sure Stephen Colbert, who is a flaming bleeding heart liberal, knows that that's the case. So he's trying to provide advertising, essentially, which is what an interview is, to Jasmine Crockett's opposition in James Tallarico. And so that is what is going on. So it wasn't CBS that forced Colbert to run this on YouTube. It was Colbert that decided he was going to run this on YouTube. And so Colbert went on with his plea. "Let's just call this what it is. Donald Trump's administration wants to silence anyone who says anything bad about Trump on TV because all Trump does is watch TV. He is like a toddler with too much screen time. He gets cranky and then drops a load in his diapers." Wow. Ha ha ha. Cue the laugh track. Studio audience, clap. Ha 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 ha. Hopefully that little paragraph there from Colbert is a pretty strong indication as to why nobody is watching his program, why nobody is watching The Late Show on CBS. It's not funny. And let's just break down this statement. I don't want to give too much credence to what Colbert said, but I just have to point this out. He says, "Let's just call it what it is. Donald Trump's administration wants to silence anyone who says anything bad about Trump on TV." Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, for 10 years now, if you turn on any major television network, you will find hosts and anchors discussing how awful, evil, and terrible Donald Trump is. This hasn't just been going on for a couple of months. This has literally been going on for 10 whole years. 10 years on CBS, on ABC, on NBC. every single night on their evening news programs, on their so-called comedy shows, which are hosted in late night, on their Sunday shows, which are hosted. All they do is trash Donald Trump. All they do is trash Republicans. And so if you're going to make this argument, you'd hope you'd have some evidence to really back it up, because it's just not the case. If Donald Trump was truly interested in silencing anybody that doesn't sing his praises, Stephen Colbert would have been off the air 8 years ago. Jimmy Kimmel would have been fired 8 years ago. Jimmy Fallon would have been yanked off television 8+ years ago if that was truly the case. But it's not. And it's this woe is me victim mentality from a guy who, by the way, is making $20 million a year. $20 million bucks. And I'm supposed to feel sorry for him? Really? It just goes to show you how out of touch these shows are with the American people. You've got regular, everyday, middle-class Americans that sit down and watch this show every night. I don't know why, but they do. And they have to listen to this Hollywood elitist, this guy who's been making tens of millions of dollars a year now for quite a significant amount of time, complain about how he's not allowed to do what he wants. Meanwhile, these individuals' alarms are going off at 5 o'clock in the morning and they're getting ready to go out and work their blue-collar job. And they're supposed to feel sympathetic for old Steve Colbert. They're supposed to be shedding a tear that the millionaire that is on their television every night doesn't get to do exactly what he wants. He was provided the options. He chose not to. Then he went on to joke about how Brendan Carr's FCC wouldn't even let him show a photo of Representative James Tallarico under the equal time rule, saying, quote, "I can't show any pictures of Tallarico. I'm not even sure I can say the words James Tallarico. But when I can show you is what we always show when we have to pull material at the last minute. A, quote, tasteful nude of Brendan Carr." And then put up a fake picture of Brendan Carr censored. Wow. Hilarious. I almost fell out of my chair here laughing. Now, I can't play the clip for you because I don't want to trigger CBS's takedown rule for our podcast on YouTube and all of our other platforms. But as you can imagine, it wasn't funny. As you have come to understand with shows like The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, there's no comedy in these shows anymore. It is liberals like Colbert and Fallon and Kimmel go on TV for 30 minutes every night, complain about Donald Trump and complain about the Republicans. They have their studio audience clap and hoot and holler every time anybody says anything negative about Trump, and they come back and do it the next day. It's not compelling content. It's not interesting content, and nobody is interested in it. Case in point, why Stephen Colbert is getting canned here in the month of May. Why CBS is moving away from The Late Show in May. Folks, it's not interesting content. It's why you are seeing, I would argue, the destruction of mass media here in America, because they are not providing audiences with content that is compelling or interesting. This has got nothing to do with Donald Trump. This has got nothing to do with Brendan Carr. It's not Barry Weiss's fault. This is Colbert's fault. This is Kimmel's fault. This is Fallon's fault. They're not interested in providing interesting content. They're not. If they were, they would have moved on from the Trump shtick, because it's just, frankly, not interesting at this point. It's just not. 10 years of this crap on television. 10 years of this garbage night in and night out. You've heard the analogy of beating the dead horse. That's where we're at with these programs, folks. It's just not interesting. Comment coming in on our Rumble live chat. Colbert is angry and not funny. It's exactly the case. It's why nobody watches. And it's why CBS made what I will say is probably a pretty difficult decision late in July of last year to end The Late Show come May. And so how does this tie in with how we opened the program, talking about the great Rush Limbaugh? Rush's show was very political, obviously, for anybody that spent any amount of time listening to him. He was an unabashed conservative. No surprise or shock for anybody to find that out. His show had a lot of comedic bits, a lot of funny parodies, music parodies, all of that stuff. Very well produced and very well done. There's one big key difference, however, between what Rush Limbaugh was doing and what somebody like Stephen Colbert is doing. There was an audience interested in listening to Rush. 20 to 30 million listeners a week on a radio program, which still goes down as some of the highest rated programming ever to exist in American radio history, outside of, major sporting events and things like that. There is no question about it by any metric. Rush Limbaugh had the most popular and successful talk show in American history. Stephen Colbert does not have the most successful and most popular late night show in American history. He does not. You've probably got to go back to the George Sullivan days to find something like that. The old Jay Leno days, the old David Letterman days, to find when those shows were seeing the most the most amount of viewers, the most interesting content, things of that nature. And so there's a keen difference between what you saw with somebody like Rush and the success that he had, and individuals like Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, and CNN and MSNBC. Right? This is an issue that is relevant across the entire media landscape. It's not unique to television. It's not unique to radio. This is a problem all across the board. This is a major, major problem that those on the left just seemingly do not know how to deal with. They are so caught up in their political ideology. They are so caught up in their agenda that they are unwilling to look past that and say, maybe let's get back to something that's funny. Right? I talked about this, was it last week or the week before? Right? People look to movies, television, video games, books, comedy. They look to this stuff from a break for reality. That's why comedy is what comedy is. These shows aren't breaks from reality. It's fuming liberals sitting up on TV bitching and complaining about Republicans and Donald Trump every night. You don't need to stay up until 11:35 p.m. to watch that. You can turn on CNN and MSNBC and watch it all day. It's not interesting. It's not new. And there just seems to be this huge disconnection. Maybe stepping away from political stuff is a good idea. Now, obviously, there's some things you're going to need to talk about, right? It's a comedy show. It's a current event show. So there's topics where it should come up and probably makes sense to. But when it's the main topic and main discussion every single night for 10 flippin' years, it is hard to, well, for me, it's not hard, but I guess for them, it's hard to understand why people are just not interested in that anymore. And so as we round out the program on this Wednesday morning, and remember the great Rush Limbaugh, this is back during the State of the Union in 2020, which, by the way, is coming up next Tuesday. So we'll have a full breakdown, full analysis of that coming up a week from today on next Wednesday's program. This is an amazing moment that unfolded at the State of the Union back in 2020.
Almost every American family knows the pain when a loved one is diagnosed with a serious illness. Here tonight is a special man, beloved by millions of Americans, who just received a stage 4 advanced cancer diagnosis. This is not good news, but what is good news is that he is the greatest fighter and winner that you will ever meet. Rush Limbaugh, thank you for your decades of tireless devotion to our country. And Rush, in recognition of all that you have done for our nation, the millions of people a day that you speak to and that you inspire, and all of the incredible work that you have done for charity, I am proud to announce tonight that you will be receiving our country's highest
civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I will now ask the First Lady of the United States to present you with the honor, please. Rush and Catherine, congratulations.
What a cool moment. That was back during the presidential State of the Union back in 2020. Again, Trump's State of the Union coming up next Tuesday night. We'll bring you the full recap, full analysis of that 1 week from today right here on the Nick Craig Show. Thanks to the Law Group in Wilmington for making it all possible. Appreciate their financial support. You can visit them online, lawgroupnc.com, or give them a call, 910-251-6088. The Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook. It's also available 24/7 in your favorite podcast app, and is heard weeknights, 9 to 10 p.m. on WBT Radio in Charlotte. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday. We'll do it again tomorrow morning right here on The Nick Craig Show.